going to try to be a little bit more positive today. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to try. And at least there's that. Let's get started. Hi, hello, and welcome in. Ball Don't Lie, episode number 130. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Take a moment right now, share the podcast with somebody you know, maybe somebody you love, maybe somebody you want to love, maybe somebody you have a crush on. Share it with them and say, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about, even if you and I both know that's probably not. Leave a rating wherever you're watching it or wherever you're listening to it, Spotify, Apple, iHeart, whatever you can. Like, subscribe, all those things. And thank you for being here. Here's a couple of things to get me started today. A couple of things that are bothering me. A couple of conversations that need to be had. I live in Cincinnati. I'm on the radio in Cincinnati. And the main topic of conversation right now is Sean Miller leaving Xavier and going to Texas. And there are people that seem to be really angry about this and angry about coaches leaving and moving on and going this way and going that way and whatever it might be. And I don't quite understand the anger. I don't quite understand why you're mad. Now, for Xavier, it's a bit of a unique situation. Sean Miller got his start in Cincinnati in 2004 when he was with Xavier. And then he left and he got in a bunch of trouble. And Xavier kind of brought him back, even though there was still some stuff up in the air about Sean Miller and his future. And he said on his introductory press conference back at Xavier that he was going to take them to new heights, places they've never been before, which for Xavier would be the Final Four. They've been to every other level of the NCAA tournament. They just haven't been to the Final Four or won a national championship. So 3 years later, Sean goes to a couple of NCAA tournaments, goes to the Sweet 16 his first year with Xavier, but then he leaves and goes to Texas. And people are mad about this, and I'm not really sure why they are mad about this. Number one, Sean Miller owes it to himself and to his family to go and do whatever is best for him. And going to Texas might be best for him financially, might be best for him with his family, and might be best for him in terms of opportunity to win a national championship. And I'm kind of tired of hearing people complain about the state of college athletics. It's getting old to me. I'm tired of hearing that same old trope that it's the wild, wild west and there are no rules. Well, if that's the case, then you should be taking advantage of the fact that there are no rules. College sports is a cesspool of selfishness and greed. And you can either adapt to that and make the most of it, or you can bitch and moan and complain and cry about it until something changes. Here's the thing. It's not going to change anytime soon. The transfer portal and the way that is constructed, I guess, is the best way to say it. The schedule, the classes never all being on the same schedule, and all the academic calendars being different, and the tournaments and the playoffs and the postseason all overlapping with those schedules and the portal and NIL. It's never, ever, ever. Well, I shouldn't say ever. But it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. There is no governing body. There is no leadership. There is no set of rules. You literally can do basically whatever you want, and nobody will do anything about it. And so because of that, there are always greener pastures. There are always places with deeper pockets. Texas is one of them, and Sean Miller is going there. Is it a basketball school? No, it's not. It's a football school, but it's a school with a lot of pockets in the SEC, with deep pockets, I should say, a lot of money in deep pockets in the SEC. And that's going to be better for Sean Miller in his hopes to winning a championship and maybe building the brand at Texas. And the smaller schools like Xavier, and they can be an effective and impactful and good program that can win national championships. They really can. But you can't do that. You can't expect that every time a head coach comes in to Xavier that you're going to be there for the next 15 or 20 years. You can't expect that. I mean, there's only a few jobs in the country in which you get that job and you think, I'm not leaving here until I get fired. North Carolina, Duke, Kansas, maybe Michigan State, UCLA, maybe those schools. Even then, that list is dwindling. It's not what it used to be. There are only a handful of those schools that you're trying to get to, the true blue bloods. I mean, even Coach Cal left Kentucky, and now Mark Pope, the head coach there, I doubt that he's going to leave just because he went to UK and won a championship there. Hell, Rick Pitino left Kentucky all those years ago. So it's just the way the world works. And so we can keep complaining about it, but that's not really going to do anything about it. You need to, much like we always talk about with the Bengals or with professional sports, ask and hope that your athletic director and your athletic department and the people involved there are pursuing every possible angle to get as much money into the department as you can so that you can aggressively pursue a championship, whether that's through getting better coaches or better players or better facilities or whatever it might be. That is the state of college athletics. It will not change anytime soon. And the players on the lower end of the totem pole, the smaller sports, the players that just barely get a scholarship, and all the different rule changes that are happening. And I say rule changes in air quotes because who knows what really it's going to look like in a few years. Those people are suffering the most. It's all being built around football and basketball because those generate the most money. Until there is some way, shape, or form a plan in place with a governing body to make things equal and to enforce rules, this is just only going to get worse. It really is the wild, wild west. And you can either keep complaining about it or you can exhaust every avenue to be a major player in college athletics. And that's what a lot of teams are doing. You're finding those teams to be successful. And what I think is interesting too is the competition, especially when looking at the NIL and the transfer portal. I say the NIL like I'm an old person. When you look at NIL and transfer portal, I always wonder, is that going to make overall the leagues more competitive? Now, it might have a negative impact on incoming freshmen and young players. And maybe eventually the elite of the elite are those who get through, you know, from high school to college as true freshmen. Maybe that's the biggest negative impact to have on it. But is the competition level going to be more balanced, more evened out? Because good players who don't play at a certain school will transfer to another school. And so, thus, especially in the SEC, you saw it this year in basketball. A ton of teams from the SEC make the NCAA tournament. There was a lot of good teams in the SEC in football this year, and they all kind of beat up on each other, and they didn't really make it to the top, or they hurt themselves moving forward into the college football playoff. I wonder if, especially in conferences like the SEC, in a conference like the Big Ten, in a conference like the Big 12, especially for basketball, if those players transferring back and forth to one school to another school to whatever, you don't play at Alabama, but you're going to go play at Vanderbilt, or you don't play at Vanderbilt, but you're going to go play at Oklahoma, or whatever it might be. I wonder if that's going to balance out a little bit the competition to where these conferences are not as top heavy as they've been in the past. But quite frankly, I'm just tired of people complaining about college sports. This is because it's because of greed. It's because of selfishness. It's because the TV networks were given too much power and there was too much money put into this. And now everybody is chasing their own bag. And I don't know what the end game is, but I don't expect there to be an end game anytime soon. I think from football, eventually we'll basically have another NFL. It'll be the minor leagues of the National Football League. Guys will get paid. There'll be some rules financially for that. There'll be their own leagues, their own conferences. That's eventually what's going to happen with football. They keep talking about expanding the NCAA tournament in basketball, and I just think that's silly. There's already 68 teams that get in. But it's not going to change. So I'm kind of done complaining about it. And I'm just kind of seeing who's the best at navigating this. Who is going to make the most of the opportunities and the fact that there are no rules to abide by right now? That's kind of what I'm looking at as far as college sports are concerned. We're going to get into the big advice here. You may have noticed over the last couple of months since I started this podcast, I've kind of changed the way I approach social media. I've changed the way I do this podcast. I've kind of changed a lot of the stuff of my online and social presence. And one of the reasons for that, or the biggest reason for that, is now that I've been in this business of radio for almost 8 years now, I've learned and I've come to learn, and I'm continuing to learn that um, it's hard to stay here. It's hard to be sustainable, this life and this business and this, all of it, if you're not able to market yourself and sell yourself. Coming in, I didn't realize that. I was admittedly ignorant. I didn't know just how important the sales and the advertising and the marketing side of it was. And I would say wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years ago where I really started to understand the importance of it. And I feel foolish saying that, but when you're a kid and you have this dream of, being on the radio or talking about sports, you don't really think about how that's financed and who's paying for that. And I've learned that lesson recently, and I'm trying to get better at that. I don't know that I am the most marketable person. I don't know that I'm the most marketable personality. One of the things I struggle with personally is that I I I, I can't fake it. I really can't. What you see with me is what you get. I'm honest. I'm um, genuine. I'm not going to tell you something you want to hear. I'm going to tell you truthfully what I think. And sometimes and oftentimes, the truth is usually in the middle between one side of an issue or the other side of an issue. And the people that make the big money and the people that are easily marketable are the people that might be yelling and screaming and passionate and loud and defending vociferously that one side of the subject or another side of the subject. I try my best to use logic and reasoning to find truth and to use the truth to guide us to whatever answers we might be looking for. That's kind of my whole purpose. And I want to be myself, and I don't want to lose myself in that. But I'm learning that that's often not something that's marketable. You know, I was told recently by someone that I need to find my shtick, and I don't know that I have a shtick. I was told that almost a year ago, and I've been trying to figure that out. I don't know that I have one. Am I the voice of reason? I don't know. Um, but if you're out there, if you're listening, if you could help me, help me. I'm not afraid to ask for help. I will check my ego at the door with this. I'm very proud of a lot of the things that I've accomplished. I'm very proud of this podcast. I'm very proud of who I am and how far I've come in a lot of different ways. But I know that this road only goes so far. And I am curious to know how I can get better at that aspect. And I'm constantly asking people for this advice. I ask people in my field, I ask people in my office, I ask my bosses. I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm just looking for advice. I'm crowdsourcing here ways that I can become more marketable without losing who I am. Because I don't want to do that. I refuse to do that. I'm not gonna do it. I get mad and I get pissed and I yell and I scream and I do those things, and those moments happen. But I'm not going to do that for the sake of doing it. And I'm just kind of struggling to come to grips with that part of my life right now and how I can make this sustainable and comfortable financially if I'm not marketable. So I don't know. I've been wanting to kind of have this conversation on here for a while. I've been wanting to kind of have these thoughts for a while, but haven't really had opportunities to talk about it because so much has been going on. But I've just been thinking about that a lot, milling on that a lot, and trying to figure out how to approach that. So if you can help me, please reach out any way, shape, or form. You can do that because I would love to get better and learn more about that side of myself. All right, let's switch gears to the Bengals. I'm going to take a cup of coffee here, a drink of coffee here. So the Jamar Chase and T. Higgins deals got done. but it kind of left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of Bengals fans. And the reason for that is because the contract structures for Chase and Higgins were expected to lower their cap hits in 2025. If you don't know what a cap hit is, the salary cap in the National Football League is like 279, $289 million, whatever it is now. I can't remember. And that is the most money you're allowed to spend on your roster. You can avoid that by giving out more cash that is not against the cap, aka signing bonuses, performance bonuses, roster bonuses, and so on. That stuff does not count against the total cap number that you have to spend. So, for example, you might make $8 million. That's your base salary. That goes against the cap. But you might have a $15 million roster bonus that you get in March. That doesn't count against the cap. So those sorts of things, these contracts are easily manipulated so that you can spend a lot of cash without spending all the way up to the cap, or you can maximize the cap space in filling out the rest of your roster. The idea was, with signing Chase and Higgins to long-term extensions, that they would lower the amount of money spent for them on the cap and increase the amount of cash spent on them outside the cap, which would then create more cap space for the Bengals because it would change their current contract structures. And unfortunately, the Bengals did not really do this. I think in total they saved a little less than $400,000 against the cap this year because they didn't structure the contracts properly. And there is now a belief, and I to promote another podcast, it's called Locked On Bengals. Jake Lisco and James Rapine did a great job explaining this. And I made an episode a couple of weeks ago where I said, are the Bengals cheap or are they incompetent? And I repeatedly called them incompetent because it seems like they have no idea what they're doing when it comes to this. But after listening to them and after reading about it in all these different ways, I'm starting to think maybe they are cheap. Maybe they are just, and I know sirens going off for all of Bengals fans to say about time, but it seems like they purposefully manipulate these contracts to make it appear as if they are spending up to the cap, when in reality they are not maximizing the resources to win a championship. That can be called cheap, that can be called incompetent, and that can be called not willing to win at all costs. And if you're a Bengals fan, you should have a problem with that. But much like talking about college athletics and how that's not going to change anytime soon, so we should stop complaining about it, I think you can look at the Bengals through the same lens. They have not changed really for the better part of 40 years. I've talked a lot, and I talked earlier in episodes in this podcast about how they have changed, but they've changed slowly and they have not changed a ton. Once you change a lot over the course of time, you need to continue to adapt. I've said this repeatedly. I think the Bengals are on the right track, but they still have a lot left to change and to fix and to adapt to. And so if you operate under the assumption that the team is not going to change the way that they structure contracts, you have to operate under the assumption that winning is going to be considerably harder in Cincinnati. You are not maximizing your resources. You are not maximizing your players. You are not maximizing every possible avenue needed to win a championship. The Bengals have done a lot of good, but this is something that they are still missing, and it's an issue. But you have to now figure out how to operate through that, with that, despite that, in spite of that. So now it becomes, all right, can Joe Burrow basically be the guy? Can Joe and Jamar and T, can they just pick this team up and lead them to a Super Bowl? It is possible. We saw what happened in 2021. The Bengals did spend a lot of money and they built around Joe Burrow, and almost everything went right, and they were 3 plays away from winning the Super Bowl. I've said repeatedly, hope is not a strategy. And it feels like a lot of the way the Bengals are built is around hope. Hoping that you hit on the draft picks. Hoping that nobody raises a bunch of stink about the fact that you screwed up the cap again. hoping that Joe Burrow plays out of his mind, hoping that everybody stays healthy, hoping that firing the defensive coordinator will fix the defense, hoping this, hoping that. Seems like that's what so much of this is built off of. And that's disappointing. You never want to have hope as a strategy. Now, competition and being competitive and being a legitimate contender in the AFC, anything can happen. But that is a tough division filled with teams that are being aggressive in their pursuit of a championship. Teams that aren't using hope as a strategy, teams that are maximizing their resources. The Bengals can do it, and it is possible. And I'm not giving up on this season or on this team, and I never will. But just looking at it, it's hard to win. You're making it harder on yourself to win when you don't do everything correctly. So, moving forward, operating under that assumption that they aren't going to change and this is how they are going to do business, you now have to look for the pathways to how they can be successful. It starts with the draft. We are now less than a month away from the NFL draft, which happens in Green Bay, Wisconsin at historic Lambeau Field coming up at the end of April. And the Bengals have the 17th pick in the draft, and they only have 6 picks in the draft this year. So when I look at everything that's happened this offseason, and I look at the number of draft picks that they have, and the number of needs and holes that they still need to fix, to me, I look at all of that and I can give you two guarantees for the Bengals at the NFL draft in less than a month from right now. The first one is their first pick will be an edge rusher. The reason for this being, historically, repeatedly, over the course of this franchise's history, they draft to replace players. They drafted Myles Murphy with the idea of replacing Trey Hendrickson. They've drafted multiple tackles, Jake Fisher and, what was that other cat's name? Cedric Ogbuehi. They did that with the idea of replacing Andrew Whitworth. They drafted Dax Hill because they needed to replace Jesse Bates. They drafted Jordan Battle because they needed to replace Von Bell. They historically draft to replace players, even players that are currently here already. And so because of that, knowing that the contract situation with Trey Hendrickson is still unresolved and there's nobody else that you feel comfortable rushing the passer, Myles Murphy's still on his rookie deal, Joseph Osai on a 1-year deal, Cam Sample coming off of a serious injury. You don't know what he's going to be, and he isn't a great pass rusher to begin with. Sam Hubbard retired. There's nobody that can provide pass rush. They desperately need it. This draft class is deep, and they will pick a edge rusher with their first pick of the draft. Now, notice I didn't say first round pick. That's because guarantee number 2 is that they will trade back in one of the first 3 rounds. I can almost guarantee you it's going to happen. Wouldn't surprise me if it was in the first, second, or third round. I would guess that they're going to stick to their 17th pick in the first round, but I expect the second or third round pick to be traded back in exchange for more picks. Again, the reason for this being, they signed Lucas Patrick, who is a guard. They signed Cody Ford, who is a guard. Those 2 guys are not starting quality NFL offensive linemen. They still need 2 starting guards. They still need a backup offensive tackle. They still need multiple pass rushers. They still need a linebacker because Jermaine Pratt's not going to be here. And they still need a long-term answer at safety because Geno Stone is going to be gone. So I look at all those things, and I look at the fact that they only have 6 picks right now, and you don't have many in the top 100, obviously. Makes me think, okay, they've done this in the past. They've traded back. They lost a draft pick last year when they traded for Khalil Herbert after Zach Moss went down. They are going to trade back one of their first 3 picks and get multiple picks in return because they have too many this roster and the money that they've spent, kind of given themselves a little bit of space to spend on draft picks, which makes me think they will be active in acquiring draft picks in the first 3 rounds. Now, as far as who they pick with an edge rusher? I don't know. There's a lot of really good ones. I think you could make the case that they draft an offensive lineman in the first round. I think that would make a lot of sense. They don't always do that if it's not in the top 12 or 15 picks. I don't know that they would do that outside of that. The last time they did it, they got burnt with Billy Price and Jonah Williams. Not great. So I don't know that they are going to do that. I think they would probably value the defense with draft picks more. You look at the way that they've drafted recently, it's been primarily defense, especially early on. So I would guess, and I know they drafted Amarius Mims last year. Jury's still out, although he had a really good rookie season. So I would guess that they're not going to pick an offensive lineman in the first round. I feel I'm pretty certain on that guarantee that they're going to draft an edge rusher. As far as who, we're going to get into that next week when we do another episode, and over the next couple of months or the next couple of weeks leading up to the NFL draft. So ultimately, I'm just frustrated that we're still having this conversation. And while yes, they did get the deals done that they were supposed to get done, it signaled that the Bengals are going in the right direction, but the contract structure signaled otherwise, which makes you feel like, and to steal a line from Joe Goodberry, the Bengals have to do everything with one hand tied behind their back. Zach Taylor has to coach with one hand tied behind his back because he doesn't have a team that's maximize its resources with good players. Joe Burrow, the same reason, has to play with one hand tied behind his back. All the coaches have to coach with one hand tied behind their back. And is it because the Bengals are too cheap to actually structure their contracts this way? Is it because they're too stupid to figure out how to do it correctly? Or is it because they don't really want to win? Like I've said it before, it's hard to beat the they don't want to win allegations when your actions suggest that you don't want to win. And I do believe they want to win. But can you say that you really truly want to win if you aren't doing everything possible to win? I don't know that you can. All right, that's going to do it for me. By the way, coming up, Reds opening day. Just it's tomorrow if you're listening to this on Wednesday. Maybe next week we'll talk about the Reds. We'll have a couple of games under our belt. I'll have a conversation at the start of the show next week about the Reds, but down for opening day. If you've got it this far in the podcast, you've gotten this far in the podcast, there's nothing better. Seriously, nothing better than opening day. Over 100,000 people will be disseminating on downtown Cincinnati. It's going to be fantastic. And I'm just going to try to enjoy watching Ellie De La Cruz play baseball this year. I hope you will too. All right. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, whatever you do. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks so much for listening to episode number 130 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. My name is Austin Elmore. We'll see you next week. And as always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.